Hello from St. Thomas Episcopal Church and School in San Antonio, Texas, and welcome to our last session of Kitchen Table Bible Study. So this Bible study kind of came about in a strange way. When I was laying this out in my mind, going into this series, I was thinking about topics. I wasn't thinking about which book of the gospel. And as it turns out, I was realizing when I started the preparation for this session that we'd done one session in Matthew, one session in Mark, one session in Luke. And so I thought, well, let's do the fourth session in John, which kind of threw me for a loop because I had sort of planned on doing, looking at the teachings in the latter part of Jesus' ministry, ending with the crucifixion. But John tells the story entirely differently. So it kind of made me go back to square one and look at John and see. And it actually was a blessing for me because I got to delve into some aspects of John's gospel that I hadn't before. I was thinking about having done the readings each week in a different translation because we started this talking about translations of the Bible. And so I wasn't able to do that because I wound up using the English Standard twice because I needed my interleaved Bible a second time. But this time, and this is because of something serendipitous that happened this last week, and I'm going to use the New International Version. And I know that when I was discussing the translations of the Bible, that I said I really couldn't get next to the New International Version. And I have been forced to eat my words, which I will definitely do. But I'm in the process of cleaning out my father's house, getting it ready to sell. And I came across, and I didn't even know that this was there, I came across my father's study Bible, which is a New International Study Bible. And of course I snatched it up and brought it home because it was my father's. But when I got to actually looking at it and reading it, I'm like, you know something? I think I actually really do. I can get next to this. So I'm eating a little humble pie here. And so today I'm going to be reading out of the New International Version. By the way, this is a very good study Bible, just in case you want to know, kind of hearkening back to our very, very first session together. This is Zondervan's, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Oh, let me see. Yeah, the Zondervan New International Version Study Bible. That's all I know it as. But I really do like it. The only difference that I've been marking it up because, it's me. But it has been fun to go and find little places where my father made notes in it, just little tiny notes in it. So that's kind of fun. I did put the markers in, or the page tabs in for it. And by the way, I don't know, I'm probably going to regret this, but I don't know if you can see this, these tabs. I hope that you can see them. They're different colors, and I love these tabs. They're by a company called, are you ready for this? Tabby. These are Tabbies, T-A-B-B-I-E-S. And I like these because there's a different color for each section of the Bible. So the Torah, the first 5 books, they're tabbed in pink. The history books are tabbed in orange. The books of wisdom are tabbed in yellow. The prophecies in green. The Gospels in blue. And I think they ran out of colors because all of the rest of the New Testament is tabbed in purple. And then there's kind of a purplish pink for things like a concordance or maps or an index or something like that. So I really do like these. I put these in all of my Bibles. And I've gotten now to where I can tab a Bible in about an hour at breakneck speed. But so this Bible has become very special to me because it was my father's. And so I'm going to read to you from the New International Version. Okay. We're going to basically take John's Gospel from beginning to end literally. We're going to start with chapter 1, verse 1, and we're going to go through to the end. Now, we're not going to go through everything, of course, because we don't have time. So we're going to hit some high points. But I was just interested in a lot of John's hearkening back to the Old Testament. So this one's going to be kind of fun for me too. So let's get started. And I'm really quite honest about this. This is The beginning. We're going to start at the beginning. Let's take a look at the Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. So it's important to know that in the terms of the Gospel, which would have been written in Koine Greek, but this was also true of Hebrew as well, that word also meant very frequently, in addition to word, but not just a single word, it meant wisdom, and it also meant divine reason that orders the world. And so it means so much more than just in the beginning was the Word. Well, what does that mean? That means the divine wisdom, the divine creation that orders the world. And so when you come into the book of John, and with that in mind, it kind of casts the whole gospel in a slightly different point of view. And typically, John is held to be the most philosophical of the four gospels. The other three are more of a biography, which is why they're called the synoptic gospels. And John is more of the philosophical gospel. And he kind of sets the stage for that in chapter 1, verse 1. And there we are. So what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at John. We're going to start with 14. And we're going to be comparing this with Exodus. We're looking at, in Exodus, chapters 33 and 34. In the Gospel of St. John, we're actually going to be talking about 5 verses. So chapter 1, verses 14 through 18. So this is really even before John the Baptist really comes on the scene. We're going to be, it lays this groundwork from the Old Testament to the New Testament. So which one will we start with? Let's start with the revelation of God's Word. Now, in the Old Testament, the revelation of God's Word is the Torah. In the New Testament, the revelation of God's Word is Jesus. So let's take a look at our first point, and that is God dwelling among us. Now, in the Old Testament, God dwelt in the tabernacle. And in Exodus, Moses is the only one who gets to see God. And even he doesn't get to do it face to face. So I'm going to kind of skip around here a little bit instead of reading the entire thing. But let's take a look at chapter 33 in Exodus. And let's look first, at verse 10. Then we're going to go take a look at verse 14. And then we're going to go down to verse 16. Okay. Hang on just a second. You may have to... I think I got that right. Okay. So, verse 10. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to his tent. Now let's skip over to verse 14. Let's skip over to verse 14. My presence will go with you. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And then I think I'm just going to go straight through. I was going to just skip right to 16, but let's do 15 because that kind of connects them. Then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name. So this is a kind of, a long section here about the presence of the Lord. Now let's flip over back to the Gospel of St. John and pay attention because this is going to go by really quick. It's one verse. Verse 14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. There you go. Okay, So let's look at the next one. And this is God's glory. Who beholds God's glory? In the Old Testament, it's Moses. Moses is the only one who's allowed. And even he is not allowed to see God face to face. In the New Testament, the disciples get to. These fishermen, tax collector, these ordinary people. They aren't special in any way, except that Jesus called them, and they get to see Jesus. So let's go back to the Old Testament, and so we're going to be in. Again, we're going to stay in chapter 33 here, and we're going to start with verse 18. And then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." So now let's flip over again back to the Gospel of St. John. And again, this is going to go by real fast because this is actually only part of a verse. So we started the last time in verse 14. So we're going to call that verse 14a, and this is verse 14b. "We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Okay. So our next little section here is we're going to take a look at the law as given through Moses. Now, this is going to be on both of them this time. So the law. In these two chapters, we're really talking about all of chapter 34. I could read the whole thing. I probably won't. Let's start with chapter 34, verse 10. "Then the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I command you today." And so, you can see that this is starting to set out the law. Let's see. "Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves to their gods and sacrifice to them, they will invite you and you will eat their sacrifices. And then you'll choose some of their daughters as wives for your son," etc., etc. "Do not make cast idols. The first offspring of every womb belongs to me, including all the firstborn males of your livestock, whether from herd or flock. Redeem the firstborn donkey with a lamb. But if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem all your firstborn sons." Which, by the way, is the command that resulted in Mary and Joseph bringing Jesus to the temple for the presentation. So just a little note there. That's where this comes from. So now let's go back over to the Gospel of St. John again. We're still in chapter 1. And let's take a look at verse 17. "For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." There we are. So all of this, the law given through Moses, one line. The law was given through Moses, the grace and truth through Jesus Christ. So our last point here is the idea that no one can see all of God's glory, although the disciples can see it reflected in Jesus. We're having a little Siamese commentary here. Probably he'll settle down in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and go back to the section in Exodus. And let's see. So we're going to go back to chapter 33, and we're going to pick up at verse 20. And so this is the Lord talking to Moses. "But you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." And then the Lord goes on to talk to Moses about how they can meet and Moses can still be safe. And this is, preparing for the new stone tablets. I think you probably remember in the story of Exodus that Moses went actually up on the mountain twice. He went up the first time and received the commandments and came down, and the Israelites were totally acting up. And so he got so mad he broke the tablets. So he went back up the mountain and got the second set of tablets. That's the very short version of the story. So And this is in Exodus, or this is the section where he's getting ready to go up to the mountain the second time. So now let's go back to the Gospel of St. John. And again, we're just in these few verses. And so let's see, let's go take a look at chapter 1, verse 18. So this is the last of that section. That's 5 verses. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. And there we are. So there's just these little 5 verses that kind of sum up and then build on all of this in chapters 33 and 34 of Exodus. So you might want to just at some point just sit down and just read the whole thing. It would, it's actually pretty long in Exodus to read all of that. But that I find just very, very interesting how just as at the very, very beginning of John, it sets that whole stage first with looking at the Word, which is the wisdom of God. It's almost the mind of God. And then setting the stage for how we interact with God now through Jesus. So I love the way that that's built. Okay, now the next section that we are going to look at, turned one too many pages, is a little bit about Jesus and the woman from Samaria. There's a lot of background information here in this story, and of course this is one of my absolute favorite stories. So what we have here is we have 2 groups of people. We have the Jews and the Samaritans. Now, the Samaritans are descended from Jacob, but then so are the Jews. So what happened? Well, the Samaritans kind of went one direction, and the Jews kind of went another direction. The Samaritans, if you want to say this, maybe stopped with the first 5 books of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. That's what they knew. And they believed that one worshiped God, the proper place to worship God was on a mountain. The Jews, who then, over time, they saw the rise of David and Solomon, and so the temple, the tabernacle, this was all built in Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem was the holy place. And so they would argue over these. And this is not to say, and there's kind of a feeling, I think, in the Bible that the Jews and Samaritans had nothing to do with one another, and that's actually not true. They did, but they didn't have a lot to do with each other. And so I get the feeling that the Jews kind of felt like the Samaritans were uneducated, maybe, because they didn't have all of these writings. I mean, if you look at my Bible, the Samaritans had this much of it. The Jews had all of this. So you can sort of see there's a lot of writings in here. So anything, any law, any teaching that would have been written in all of this, the Samaritans didn't know and didn't have. And so in some ways, this informs why the woman of Samaria at the well responded the way she did. There's one other just interesting note that I found while I was doing the research for this, and that is the concept of living water. And that's something around which this story very much revolves. And so the term, how we would translate living water, was often used to mean running water. And running water was thought to be more pure, more fresh, and probably tasted better than well water. And of course, the Samaritans got their water from this well that Jacob had dug, a very deep well. And in Old and New Testament times, it was considered to be what roughly we would call about 100 feet. And the well does still exist. It is unfortunately in a very disputed territory, and so it's not easy to visit it. But it does still exist. And I think call it recent. In biblical terms, it was recent because it was in the 1930s. The well was cleaned out and dug out. It turns out it was around 134 feet. So this is a deep well. And this is Samaria is in a very hilly, very hilly region. And it's not that far from Jerusalem, although by that far, I mean, it wasn't that far if you're riding a bus. But if you're walking, it's probably about an 8 days walk. So that's a pretty good walk. So the nearest settlement to this well was about a mile. And so that would be a 2-mile round trip. And she feels herself such an outcast that she goes at noon, which is the hottest part of the day. It's not necessarily what we consider noon, but it just means the beginning of the hottest part of the day. And so she would have gone to the well then. Well, she's facing a 2-mile walk. One of the miles going back with the heavy water in her water jugs. And so, but she goes alone, or she goes around noon because nobody else is going to be there and nobody's going to bother her. And so, speaking of, I see we may have some feline help here. So this sort of goes to explain why this encounter between Jesus and the woman of Samaria was very interesting. It's not that Jews never spoke to Samaritans, never visited with Samaritans. They didn't do it much, but they did. But they would consider certain of the foods that the Samaritans ate to be unclean. They probably wouldn't stay in their houses. And it definitely was anathema for a man, especially a Jewish man, to speak alone to a Samaritan woman. And you got to think that at the beginning, the Samaritan woman probably regarded this guy with a great deal, not a certain amount of, a great deal of suspicion. And so, but let's take a look at just one place in here that I just find so fascinating. And this is in chapter 4. Pretty much chapter 4 is the story of the Samaritan woman. Let's back up to verse 11. And so where the woman is saying, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?" And Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." So, this whole concept of the living water. So where did Jesus get this? Well, let's go take a look at, excuse me, sir, I kind of need to go back the Bible this way. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's go look at the prophet Jeremiah. Now, again, you remember that I said that the Samaritans didn't have these writings. So she would have had no way of knowing. Even if he had said, well, the prophet Jeremiah says X, Y, Z, she wouldn't have known because she would have never had any access to this teaching. So that's kind of interesting. So let's take a look at Jeremiah 17, and this is going to be verse 13. Let me see. I think I'll just begin at the very beginning of verse 13. "O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust." Pay attention to that. "Because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water." So this imagery of the spring, this running water, was very present in the Old Testament. And so this is what Jesus is likening, what he is bringing, the spring of living water. And so this is just, it's a lovely little passage in the book of Jeremiah, that this passage that Jesus is talking with her and the Gospel of St. John harkens back to. Now remember, this conversation with the Samaritan woman does not show up in any one of the other 3 Gospels. This is only in the Gospel of St. John. There are also some healings that are only in the Gospel of St. John, and they happen very shortly after this. And by the way, it talks about a little bit later in this story, the kind of the end of this story, that the Samaritans come to believe, and they have Jesus and his disciples stay for several days, which would be totally something Jews would not do. So we're already starting to see them reaching out beyond just their little, their tribe, if you will, and they're reaching out beyond that. So, okay, Let's go. Okay, so the other healings, healing the official's son and the healing at the pool of Bethesda, these don't happen in the other Gospels per se. They only happen, they're only told about in the Gospel of St. John. Just one of those little tidbits of information. So now let's go take a look at, we're going to call it Life Through the Son. And okay, so in the Old Testament, it was thought that only God could give life and take it away. And if you said that, you could give life, well, that was just incredibly, that was blaspheming. So let's go take a look at where that happens in the Old Testament. And yes, we're going to go back to good old trusty Deuteronomy. You didn't think you were going to get away on this last session without hearing from Deuteronomy at least once. And gentle hand, you're going to hear twice. So let's go take a look at chapter 30, verse 20. Now choose life so that you and all your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God. Listen to his voice and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life, and he will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This, by the way, is very much towards the end of Moses' life. So, in fact, he's about to go and explain to them that he's not going to be crossing over with them, that he is handing over to Joshua. But so those words that the Lord is life, and that's it. Okay, well, let's come over and take a look at in this section, and we're in chapter 5 now. In this section, from about verse 16 through verse 29, I think, is the whole section is life through the Son. But let's just look at this one place here. And this is verse 26. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to judge, because he is the Son of Man. And so you see this, where Jesus is hearkening back and taking it farther. And this is the theme. Yeah, if you don't get anything out of this Bible study, I would like you to get the idea that the law in the Old Testament, Jesus takes that law. He knows it. He takes it. He was there for it. And then he expands it farther. He takes it farther. He takes it deeper. So, and this is what he's doing in this passage, which is really, really cool. So, the next thing I would like to look at, and we are just going at breakneck speed through the Gospel of St. John, but there's a lot here. This next section is the very end of chapter 7, the beginning of chapter 8. So it's, it's chapter 7, verse 53 through chapter 8, verse 11. And this section in the Gospel of St. John, which is in almost all modern Bibles, was not in the earliest scriptures. It was not in the earliest copies of the Gospel of St. John. So there is some dispute as to whether it should have been in one of the other Gospels. Should it have been placed somewhere else in the Gospel of St. John? Is it entirely apocryphal and never actually really happened? There is a lot of indication that it actually did really happen, but exactly where, we don't know. If you look at the chronological placement of it in the Gospel of St. John, it really couldn't happen there because of other things that were happening. So, and this is the story of the woman caught in adultery. Now, the whole thing here in this story, let's give a little background to this story, is that the Pharisees and the teachers are trying to trap Jesus. And they're trying to trap him into something that they can use to get rid of this troublemaker. So they're trying to trap him in a sort of a legal way. And here's the deal. Under Roman law, the Jews could not put anyone to death. But they could convince the Romans that their laws had been broken so badly that that infraction was punishable by death. And so they're trying desperately to trap Jesus. So they bring this woman and they tell him that she has been caught in adultery. Okay, now technically they violated their own laws, and we're going to see what was going on here. And why they thought that they were going to be able to trap Jesus, like that, I have no idea, but apparently they did. So let's go take a look at this. Let me see where we're going to pick this up. The teachers of the law, I'm in chapter 8, verse 3. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery, and the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So if he had said, "Oh yeah, definitely go stone her," then they could have gone to the Romans and said, "This guy's inciting riot. He told us to stone, so they told us to kill somebody, and we can't do that." If he said, "Well, no, you can't stone her," then, according to them, they could have gone to the Romans and said, "Okay, well, he's breaking our law in such a bad way that we want him put to death." So pretty much Jesus couldn't win this argument, sort of. And it's kind of interesting here that these people who were so knowledgeable kind of violated their own laws. Let's go take a look here. So let's go back to, yes, Deuteronomy. You knew I was going to take you back to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 22:22. Okay, yeah, I marked it here. Oops. Hang on. Here we go. So there are actually a couple of places in Deuteronomy where this law comes up. And so, let me see. Let's take a look at, again, yes, 22:22. If a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both the man who slept with her and the woman must die. You must purge the evil from Israel. Okay, well, notice, they didn't bring the guy, only the gal, which was against this law. And also, this law does not specify that they be stoned, only that they be put to death. So it doesn't really say how. And so they're poking Jesus into, yeah, shouldn't we stone her? Well, not according to the law, no. So even if Jesus had stayed with the absolute letter of the law, he would have been fine because they were outside their own law. Now let's go take another little look at another place in Leviticus 20:10. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. But again, it doesn't mention stoning. There is one situation where it does mention stoning, but that is not specifically what they're trying to catch Jesus out on. So two things here. They were supposed to bring both of them, the man and the woman, and it just says put to death. It doesn't say stoned. So they're kind of trying to catch Jesus out. Jesus basically could have, if he had wanted to, he could have said, you guys, that's not what the law says, so you guys are the ones that don't know the law. That's not what he does. What he does is, of course, you know this story. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And by the way, a lot of times it's like, okay, what was he doing? Do you remember when I said to pay attention in our earlier discussion about writing in the dust? And writing in the dust indicates that someone is being put to death, or that this is the death of someone. And I like to think, and I don't have a lot of reason for this, but I like to think when he's writing in the dust on the ground, he's putting their whole ideas to death. This is the end of this narrow-minded interpretation of the law. Take that for what it's worth. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to him, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And of course, they one by one go away until it's only the woman and Jesus left. And then, she says, Jesus gets up, looks around, and says, so, where's everybody? Who's accusing you? And she says, no one. And then he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. So, whether this story is apocryphal or true, it's an interesting story of trying to trap Jesus with the law, and he could have defended himself with the law, but instead he takes it that step further, that step deeper. Let he who is without sin throw the first stone. So I love this story, and you can really dig down deep into it. Okay, so let us take a look at one last thing, and this is at the very end of the Gospel of St. John. This is after the resurrection. Jesus has met the disciples. He has told them to go fish, and they are like, yeah, okay, and this is very close to the very end of the Gospel of St. John. And this is Jesus cooks the fish for them. And when they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. And by the way, we're in chapter 21, and we're at verse 15. I just read that part. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? Oh, well, that's probably what he said. And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. And the third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. So the kernel of this story is the 3 times that Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes. And so he says, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep, care for my sheep. Or feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. So where is this coming from? And this is just something I think is just really beautiful. It's in the prophet Ezekiel. Oh, by the way, if you've been following morning prayer, we've been doing readings from the lesser prophets, or the 12 short books of prophecy. Ezekiel is actually one of the major ones. I'm going to go ahead and I'm in chapter 34. I'm going to go ahead and start with verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. And so you can see where Jesus is telling Peter, yep, don't do that. Take care of these sheep. And this is almost at the very end of the Gospel of St. John. So, one of the things I think that really comes out in the Gospel of St. John, it comes out in the others too, but this is something I was made aware of fairly recently, and I think it's just something very important to keep in mind when you're reading the Gospels. The 2 things, that yes, there's the law, but what Jesus is asking us to do is internalize its meaning, not its words. Unless you want to use words as logos, as the wisdom of God. And the other one I thought was very interesting. I really had not thought about this until several weeks ago when I heard a sermon on this, and I just thought it was so good. And one of the main things Jesus is looking out for are the sheep. He's looking out for the people who are marginalized by their society. This is what you'd say today. They're marginalized. And so the woman who's caught in adultery, the teachers and the Pharisees brought her, but not the man. They want the judgment on her, but not him. And Jesus, who could have, as I say, caught them out on a legal technicality, is taking her side. And it's the same thing with the children. When we read that the people are bringing the children for Jesus to lay his hands on them, and the disciples try to shoo them away. No. And Jesus stops them and says, no, let the children come. Because if you don't receive the kingdom of heaven as a child, as a little child, you're never going to get it. So Jesus is looking at these children who are quite marginalized and thought little of in society, and saying, no, I'm here for them. There are countless examples during Jesus' ministry where he's championing those who have no champion. And he's passing this on to Peter and saying, okay, it's up to you, guy. Yes, you denied me 3 times. So 3 times. I always wonder, it's never, actually, I've never heard anybody say, he denied him 3 times. Well, Peter denied him 3 times. And so 3 times, Jesus says, do you love me? Then take care of my sheep. One way or the other, take care of the lambs, take care of my sheep. But he says it 3 times that Peter is supposed to do this. And so I think that we can take a lesson from this and take those lessons deeper into our own hearts and into our own lives. So that brings us to the end of our 4-week Bible study. I hope this has proven to be a blessing to you. It certainly has been interesting for me. I have never taught a Bible study before, other than just the small lessons I give in morning prayer. So this has been kind of a journey for me too. So anyway, thank you all for joining me in this Bible study at the kitchen table. And we'll look forward to doing some of these in the future. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore.